move on to the next question. This is both an interesting and an important question. With the wholesale defections of Fiji First MPs after the party's deregistration, questions have arisen about Parliament's democratic legitimacy. Will constitutional reforms passed by a Parliament no longer reflective of electoral outcomes and the people's will still have legitimacy? If so, how much legitimacy? I'm going to put this question to all the panelists, starting with MLA.
Well, I'll talk about three things in terms of legitimacy. No, it wouldn't be legitimate if it was just up to the members of Parliament. It doesn't matter how many people defect from one side to the other. It wouldn't be legitimate. But there were three elements that I wanted to talk about. I think there needs to be broad-based political consensus in the sense that we need to make sure that all the major political parties and stakeholders agree on the need and the scope. We're heading towards an election, and so we've got to come out of that election, if we haven't started, with a commitment that this is important. So I think in terms of how do we scope this, and whether this needs to happen, and not all major parties are in Parliament, so I think there needs to be that broad-based political consensus. The supervisor election has announced the earliest will be the 8th of August and the latest in January 2027. So obviously from the discussions, even though we're talking about an amendment, for it to be legitimate and broad-based, it has to go beyond what we have. Otherwise we go back to pulling out a copy already designed from a drawer, and that's not where we want to go. The Supreme Court has said, also has reaffirmed that the current constitution is legitimate. So it's not like we're illegal, we're working, but we're talking about the amendment. Also, there needs to be some legal clarity, and I think the best of our legal minds that are in the country need to confirm a constitutional and legal pathway, particularly when we're looking at entrenched sections of the Constitution. So I think that needs to be considered. And then there must be an independent commission that's non-partisan. And so when you're heading towards an election as a government, what would you do if you want to win an election? So it may not be a good time to start it, but I don't think the process has to wait. I think the process can start. Some of the principles that I'm talking about. And that commission has to have, our top respected legal experts, Fiji, maybe abroad, civil society leaders definitely, women definitely, like we have women who are not appointed to certain things, but I won't go there. Community representatives definitely, younger people, intergenerational commission. I better stop.
I'll put the same question to Ms. Roko Mokoti next, then Professor Frankel, and then finally Mr. Lau.
Legality versus legitimacy. That question is a hard one because there's no simple answer to it. There's no straightforward answer because you need to, in answering that question, you need to delve into political theory, you need to delve into the legal framework and the structures therein, you need to talk about public acceptance. So in that context, it's not an easy question to answer. But I'll say this, whatever reforms that are passed by Parliament, whatever laws have the legal legitimacy. Because legitimacy can be interpreted in many ways. There's political legitimacy, there's philosophical legitimacy, there's moral legitimacy. In answering that question, I also think it's important to consider how they arrived at that circumstances of defecting. Was it something beyond their control or within their control? So without wanting to pass any judgment, I know this much. They were voted in. I think this principle applies anywhere. There are consequences for defecting. Even, I think, Section 63H of the Constitution basically disqualifies you when you vote against party directions. That's the effect of defecting. But it does not specify or prescribe the effect your vote did on the actual law reform. And I don't, it'd be unconventional to find a piece of legislation being nullified because one defected, or if you know what I mean. So having said that, so we can't really pass judgment, but for those who voted for them would probably see them as violating their original mandate, because it's arguable that the 2013 Constitution is the policy of, or is the policy of the former government. It's arguable. Therefore, it's natural for you to expect those who are voted in along those party lines to support every aspect of that constitution, of the 2013 Constitution. So when they deviate, there's a violation of the mandate that they were originally given. But to answer that question, whether it's legitimate, that's for the people to decide. Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. There are consequences as well as rewards for defecting. Okay, over to you, John.
Yes, this is a question about whether the current Parliament is well equipped to handle issues of constitutional reform, given that the largest party in Parliament, Fiji First, which had, I think, 27 MPs, was deregistered by the supervisor and then effectively has been liquidated. And some of those MPs have crossed the floor and joined the government. Others have remained on the opposition side. But the dilemma for the former Fiji First, of course, is that because of the way that party campaigned at the last election, I went to some of the rallies of Fiji First, and there was such a strong emphasis on the vote for the party leader, that the vote for all the other MPs was very, very small. Everyone got brought up on the coattails of Frank Bainimarama's vote. So what are the MPs that you were formerly from Fiji First, what do they actually represent? They had such a small number of votes. Maybe at the next election they'll be able to join some of the established parties or branch out and establish a new party. But I think the important point in this is that Fiji's parliament urgently needs a major renewal. And the next election creates an opportunity, because it'll be the first election since for a long time where you know that the former authoritarian regime or authoritarian-backed regime is not going to come into office. I think you're going to see a lot of new, younger people standing, the people that Emily was referring to, which will give major opportunities to commence the process of writing a new constitution or amending the old one.
Okay, thank you, John.
Well, what we have witnessed in Fiji since last year, the wholesale defection of the MPs that belong to the former Fiji First party to the government side. Now, what that has had the effect of doing is it has essentially reconfigured the parliament. So now we have a manufactured supermajority that the government has, which it did not aim at the ballot box, but they have it due to defections. Elsewhere, I have argued that Section 20 of the Political Parties Act that has permitted these defections is actually contrary to Section 63 of the Fijian Constitution. Right? And this has essentially, eroded the, in a very drastic way, the mandate of the voters. It has really trampled upon the wishes of the voters of Fiji First. Right? So, critics of the 2013 constitution have applied a very high threshold to assess whether the 2013 constitution is legitimate or not. And it is only proper that if we are going to come up with a constitution that would be seen to be more legitimate than the current constitution, that it is actually passed by a parliament that is not compromised in any way. And if you assess it by any objective standard, the reality is that the current parliament, although it might have legal authority, it lacks democratic legitimacy.
Okay, so the question of legitimacy continues to haunt us, and I'm reminded of the very famous phrase, doctrine of necessity. I'm not sure how or if it applies here. Okay, the next question is, how can the proposed Constitution Review Commission earn the trust and confidence of Fiji's diverse communities, namely Itauke, Indo-Fijians, Rotumans, Banabans, religious minorities, women, we must not forget women, youth, and persons with disabilities, I mean it seriously, and persons with disabilities to demonstrate genuine inclusivity. Right, so I'm going to give that question first to Professor Saunders, and then Ms. Duitu Turanga, and finally Ms. Roko Mokoti.
Trust and confidence in the constitutional review process will be critical, both for ultimate ownership of the constitution that results from it and for the referendum process itself. And there's a number of different techniques that can be used, and in many ways they're pretty obvious. The process needs to be transparent. The goals of the constitutional review process need to be clear and broadly agreed. So it may be helpful in that connection to emphasize again that this is an exercise in solidarity and getting people together, a constitution that works in the interests of all people. But in addition, as many speakers have already said, there needs to be considerable participation, but I think you need to think very carefully about what that participation looks like. Procedures for inclusion and involvement and participation need to be adapted to the contexts of the communities. Different communities, different ages, people with different concerns, many of them operate differently as far as getting information is concerned and thinking about information. And so a really very thoughtful and responsive strategy for involving people that is prepared to disaggregate the communities to a degree, I think could be useful. It's important that this doesn't become just a lawyer's exercise. It's very important that everybody understands it, everybody can relate to it. And for that purpose, I think it's useful to draw in civil society, to draw in cultural groups. I remember an earlier stage in a Fiji constitutional alteration process, maybe it was the 1997 constitution. I remember a lovely young man saying, we're going to make up a poem and sit around the kava bowl and talk about the constitution. And there's lots of different ways of engaging culture to really get constitutional ideas across. In South Africa, for example, I remember they made a little comic book of what the constitution might mean to people. And in thinking about the substance of the constitution, constitutional changes that might be made, genuine consideration needs to be given to the interests of the different communities and some sort of attempt made to consolidate them, not to give particular communities an advantage, but to make sure that there can be buy-in from communities and people right across the board. And in the course of doing all this, I think there is much to be said for stressing the advantage to everybody of having a constitution that is not only accepted, but is also workable. To go back to a point made by one of the other speakers, the importance of a constitution actually working in practice cannot be underestimated. And also the constitution, the advantages of the constitution being stable. And in Fiji, of all places, the advantages of a stable constitution that will just let people get on with their lives is, I think, very important. So that's my suggestions for how you might deal with this question.
Okay, thank you, Professor Saunders.
I've always talked about the need for structured dialogue, for the longest time. I think building trust and including as diverse, and you've mentioned the different diverse groupings, not just ethnic. It can't just be binary, it can't just be male, female. We have to talk with the Soji community, we have to talk with people with disabilities. I think one of the issues that we've not really got to is that there's still a lot of fear, mistrust, and I think trauma. I mean, if you've had 4.5 coups, I think we're traumatized. Violence begets violence. I think a lot of us don't realize just how much we might have internalized. And so I think especially reaching out, ensuring those who've been historically left out, we need to find them, we need to engage them, the maritime areas, and not just face-to-face, but online as well. I mean, you only got to go on to social media to see that people have a lot to say on social media. So we've got to look at those different modalities in engaging others, everybody.
Okay, thank you for your contribution. The final word goes to Ms. Rokomokoti.
Thank you. I was thinking about a possible scenario where you have the authorized or the deputized commission, constitutional commission, going out into the community and asking for their views on the constitution. If we're going to talk about trust, you got to make sure that whoever is on the receiving end had said yes to the process in the first place. So they would, there's more probability and more higher chances of getting the truth out of them, because they had a part to play right from the word go. So it's important that if a constitutional making process or constitutional amendment making process is to be commenced, then you need the mandate of the people. You need them to say yes. Yes, the Supreme Court recognized that it's an imposed constitution, and drew our attention to the preamble introductory words, we the people. So if that is something that we need to focus on, then the process needs to make sure that the people are involved right from the word go. They are there at the beginning, they are there during, and they are there at the end. So openness, transparency, providing opportunities for them to access the table of discussion, and like Ms. Ndui Turanga had suggested, those in the maritime, those in the rural. You need to make sure, or the system needs to make sure, that everyone has the opportunity to present their views, and they know that whoever they are coming to give their views, that body of persons will genuinely process their views and their submissions in a way that they will see it manifest in the final product. I know it's a difficult task, it's more easier said than done, but the point I suppose I'm trying to make is you need to get the people involved right from day one. Of course, there are other things that we can talk about, but I think the second point I wanted to make was, who do we appoint to oversee such a process? That is also important. Credible, reputable locals, and that is one way of earning the trust of the people. They see one of their very own. This was exemplified in the Reeves Commission. You had Kiwi, the Reverend Reeves, and then he was accompanied and assisted by 2 locals. So there has to be some local makeup or local contribution in terms of the management and overseeing of this process. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Rokomakoti. Thank you. Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry. You just triggered something in my head. You know, often when we talk about these issues, we think that faith and culture are barriers. I think it's time that we look at church and faith and religious organizations and the Vanua as enablers. So I think that's important. And also, you know, in the UN system, because it's always all about states, there are different tracks. You know, so when we were negotiating the 2030 agenda, while the states were doing their state thing, you know, there were different tracks also available, and maybe having a multi-track, so it's not just one group of older people going around, but you have different groups, you know, church, Vanua, Banaban going on. Yeah. Sorry, I'm having a go at older people, but I'm just making a point. Thank you.
Okay, we are now to question 5 out of 6. And the question is, how can the process be kept politically non-partisan and free from political capture? Really important question. So we'll put it to all the panelists, starting with Professor Frankel, then Professor Saunders, MLN Dutuituranga, Mr. Lal, and then we're going to give it to our final speaker, Anna Rokomakoti. Professor Frankel, over to you.
Thank you. Well, I don't think it can be kept politically non-partisan and free from political capture. Constitution making, constitution building is an inherently political exercise, and it's important that the parties are represented. And everyone in the panel has emphasised the importance of inclusiveness. And I think Cheryl Saunders said it has to avoid being just a lawyer's exercise. That's right, but also, I think with the constitutional review process, inclusiveness sounds wonderful, but you can go to an extreme of sort of sending out a review team to rural areas and expecting people to tell you what should go in a constitution. You're not going to get an effective dialogue. Something like that happened in Tonga 10 or 15 years ago, where the review team went out with very little kind of clear agenda. I think you do need at the start to establish what the parameters are. You need to identify critical issues, differences that need to be bridged, and try and build some consensus, for example, in terms of reference about what the potential reform agenda is, what's a new constitution trying to achieve, how you can best, in the Fiji context, how you can best establish or promote a unified national identity and avoid the cycle of coups. But the other thing to think about, I mean, not everything needs to be constitutionalized. The electoral law, for example, has been constitutionalized repeatedly in Fiji. Maybe that's a good idea. It certainly hasn't prevented major overhauls time and time again. But the last constitution before the 2013 one, the Reeves constitution, tried to use the electoral system to generate a kind of multi-ethnic politics very unsuccessfully, if you remember. The electoral system was hoped would encourage moderates and penalise extremists. Clearly didn't work in that way. There was also an attempt at power sharing, a constitutional provision to require power sharing in cabinet, a little similar to the South African transitional constitution in 1994, and maybe with some resemblance also to what happened in Northern Ireland. Now, I don't think that that's likely to be the core focus of the next constitution in Fiji. Why not? Well, if you look at the submissions that came from those parties that have historically appealed to the Fiji Indian community, the Labour Party that used to be the majority Fiji Indian party, and the National Federation Party, which has become more of a multi-ethnic party, but nevertheless has a significant Fiji Indian base. There's no longer that clear call from the minority community for power sharing in cabinet. The demographics have changed. But I still think that a critical issue for people thinking about a new constitution in Fiji is going to be the minority inclusion. It's going to be allowing the Fiji Indian community, that's probably down to around 30% of the population, some kind of voice. So some kind of commitment to proportional representation would seem to be an important element in the constitution. We've been talking a lot about process today, and just before this session, Nilesh mentioned that that was the core intention of today's dialogue. But as things move ahead, I would hope that there would be some focus also on the content of a forthcoming constitution.
Okay, I think the question had to do with political non-partisan. When I became the General Secretary of the one of the political parties some times back ago, I realized the difference between party politics and being political. And I think what we're talking about here is that, as my friend John had said, you know, constitutionality is political, but it can't be captured by parties, yeah? So I think that's the issue, and I guess that's the distinction between those in Parliament and those who are not there. I mean, you know, we have a voting system which is very much, you know, clientele politics. You know, I'll do this, I'll pay your school fees and all of that. And that's the Pacific, so that's difficult. And then, of course, we have interest groups. So when we're saying political capture, you know, they're the business people, they're the drug cartels, they're the, you know, the military. You know, I'm just saying it as it is, right? So it's not just about political parties. There are those who capture decision-making. So I think we have to make sure, and I think the closest I came to it is making sure that the commission itself is you know, are people who are reputable. And so when they front up, people can trust that they're not wearing a party badge, you know, that they're not owning some big, you know, we won't mention them, you know. But and it's not to say that they can't influence, but when we're talking about a constitution, that everyone can have some ownership in it, then as much as possible, there has to be a political will, and I'm looking at the Minister of Justice, that's intentionally non-partisan.